Lessons from the Frontier, the official podcast of the International Space Alliance. We are a nonprofit supported by Google for Nonprofits and dedicated to accelerating frontier innovation across space, AI, and sustainability. My name is Joaquín Paz, and in each episode, we uncover the mindset, the frameworks, and the stories behind some of the most courageous builders in the space and the frontier ecosystem. In today's episode, we'll explore how storytelling helps space founders find product market fit, why emotional resonance and clarity are critical in technical domains, what startup teams can learn from NASA's deep public engagement strategies, and how Lego bricks, believe it or not, are one of the best tools for serious thinking. My guest today is Paul Propster, a longtime strategist, story architect, and facilitator at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab. Paul has spent the last decade helping scientists, technologies, and mission teams communicate with impact, and his insights are incredibly valuable for early-stage founders navigating complexity, ambiguity, and the need to inspire others. So, Paul, great to have you on the podcast. Amazing that we can have this conversation together.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Joaquin. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So, the first part of the episode is about the story blueprint, right? So I want to kind of dig deeper a little bit more about you have worked with engineers, with scientists, with astronauts, and with storytellers. Why does storytelling matter so much, especially in the frontier tech industry?
Yeah, actually, and I also wanted to say I love the title of this podcast as well. Very clever, very clever. Okay, yeah, so story and frontier tech. So, there are many possible futures, right? And that's what a lot of these teams are trying to imagine, trying to bring to fruition, right? And so there's a lot of futures out there on the frontier, kind of a universe of what ifs, and it's a competition of ideas, really, in the end. And a story helps stakeholders decide between this or that idea, and so you know you're really trying to help them believe your idea of tomorrow maybe over somebody else's, and a story is what can help you do that, right? It can help you stand out. It can help you kind of rise above the competition, we'll call it, and then it sticks. And so I think that's where story can really help is connecting, kind of um, differentiating yourself, but then also sticking with that stakeholder where they're actually telling your story to other stakeholders.
Very interesting. I read recently on LinkedIn about a startup that they 10x their product. They went from 1 million RNR to 10 million RNR just by changing the messaging of the
Yeah.
product. Same product, but the messaging was different, right?
Yeah, and sometimes you need to kind of reframe your story, right? Because maybe the landscape has changed, or maybe you now have an improvement or an enhancement. But yeah, just simply reframing your story can do a lot.
So cool. So Paul, this podcast is really part of Lunar Labs, which is the accelerator that we run in the International Space Alliance. And within Lunar Labs, we are fully focused on accelerating founders with product market fit, right? And for me, product market fit is if you get on the phone with a client and you go down and your product is not working, right? You should get clients calling you like the next minute after your app or product is down. That will mean that you're doing something great that people really love, right? So about that philosophy, about what makes a great story in a technical or scientific context, what do you think is the core philosophy that you bring to these founders so they can really accelerate their product market fit?
Yeah, and I think it's pretty straightforward. Doesn't mean it's easy, but it's pretty straightforward. And I would say maybe three things kind of come to mind is the compellingness, right? So you've got this compelling product idea, right? Um, and then the gettability, it and that kind of ties into the third one, authenticity, right? So it's really, you've got this compelling product idea. um, you got to make sure that the market understands it, understands what it is, and it's got to be real, right? They've got to, it's got to have some, these kind of what we call these credible messengers, right? We really got to be authentic in the way we talk about it. So as you described, you do get those phone calls because now you've kind of built this loyalty, right? And they're like, oh my gosh, I heard about this product when I read about it. Now I'm using it, you know, and it's doing its thing. And I get it, might be a few bugs here in the beginning. So I'm gonna, call and get
Huh?
them to really start enhancing the product. And and I would say to that point, feedback is also just great, right? Getting feedback, learning from that feedback. Don't stiff arm it, embrace it and learn from it for sure.
Very interesting. So the name that you mentioned that you like is because I believe that the blueprint is a lot of the time what they need more of the tactical, right?
Yeah.
Tools that a founder, that a team, that an organization can use instead of only the strategy, which is more sometimes ambiguous, right? So
Yeah.
going a little bit deeper there, Paul, what do you think, like when a founder is just starting out or a team is starting out, how do you think that they can begin crafting a story that really helps them find that initial product market fit for them to understand if what they're building is really working or not?
Yeah, so I think a great place to start is to make sure the team is aligned on what the story is, right? Um, and so we tend to call that a shared story. So we have some tools and methodologies to help bring the team together as to what that shared story is, and what they want to come to is a consistent, compelling story, right? That anybody on the team is able to tell, right? So they can activate that story. So now you've kind of got a force multiplier, right? So now anybody on the team and go out and maybe kind of stick their toe in different market spaces, right? Kind of share the story and see if it's getting the right fit, right? See what kind of feedback they're getting. um and so this next step is, you have the story and you're telling it, and then to listen, right? This idea of active listening to the feedback, right? And then using it to maybe help either sharpen your story, but for sure help you zero in on what is that particular fit, right, that is going to work for us.
Okay. Then I want to get that like lane of thought to go a little bit deeper. But now, what I think people and listeners want to also hear about is your experience in NASA,
Yeah.
because people think about NASA, and I don't think they think about storytelling, right? About NASA, they think
Yeah.
about space and like space exploration. So very interesting background that you have, and also very interesting kind of approach of a storytelling at NASA. Can you please talk a little bit more about or walk through a moment at NASA that you think storytelling shifted the outcome of a mission or a program?
Sure. So just about a year and a half ago, I'd say, one of our missions was selected, but was about to kind of enter phase C, which is, you're starting to build a thing, right? Um, but and get towards launch. And so, but headquarters kind of started seeing this slip in the schedule. Okay. And so they sometimes, like they do, they were thinking about canceling the project.
Hmm.
And so we needed a story to help kind of convince them to keep this mission. So this mission was called Psyche, and it was going to go to the asteroid belt and observe an asteroid called Psyche 16, which, from all our observations, was one of the only metal asteroids in the asteroid belt. So we felt it was, the core maybe of a planet that was supposed to form but didn't. And so this would be a true exploration mission. We weren't quite sure what we were going to find when we got there. And but with this schedule slip, NASA was, headquarters was thinking, oh my gosh, they may not make it. And so they asked us to kind of give them their final pitch, right? So tell us, how is this going to stay on schedule? How are you going to make this work? So it was there's a Tiger team. We got together with the director of the overall lab, Dr. Leshin, and then we I led a team of the main core players on the Psyche mission, and we bunkered down for I'd say a couple of weeks, and and then we were able to present our story in person, which was key, um, to this board from headquarters, and we knocked it out of the park is basically their words. They're like, "Oh my gosh, you really convinced us. You persuaded us. We get it. We see how you're going to be able to do this." And they let the mission continue.
Paul, I'm kind of uh, curious to know more about how you ended up being a storytelling architect in NASA. Like for me, one of the main reasons that I wanted to speak to you is because it feels to me that you carve yourself your own role, right? And people saw the impact and they said, yeah, let's do it. And then I'm going to talk about how you went there to using Lego bricks, So can you please help me understand that word?
Sure, sure, yeah. So kind of like the lovely title of this podcast, I created a title um, because when I got there, I was being introduced as the storyteller, right? And Paul's going to come in and tell your story, right? And that wasn't warmly received from a lot of the teams, especially the principal investigators, right?
Mm.
Where these are brilliant humans who have carved their way to this particular point in time where they're going to submit their life's work to NASA to try to get funding, right?
Mhm.
So they were a little defensive, but fortunately, I was able to lead an Earth mission that got awarded and a heliophysics mission that got awarded. So I started getting a little street cred,
Hmm.
but I felt I still wasn't sort of aligned with the culture. So as I had worked with those previous teams, the Earth team and the heliophysics team, I discovered that there was a system architect, there was a concept architect, there was a mission architect, and so I said, well, why don't I just call myself story architect, and I'll let them know that, like an architect, we're going to build your story together. And so that was kind of the journey. Yes, I did kind of carve out kind of this new role, and started helping other teams, and again with success. And so then I actually got some internal funding, and I was able to build a team, and we just didn't help with securing funding, in the formulation process, but we also helped all those amazing researchers that were doing um, doing this great work, but they were getting stuck. So we kind of found that there were some stuck stories as well that needed some help. Um, so that's kind of how it came about, and it's been a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. I left just in January, but it's
Uh,
been we had it going for about the last 6 years, and a lot of impact, and just a lot of fun.
so cool. I'm gonna ask you something before we go into the Lego story,
Yeah,
because I realized that when you are a founder, okay, remember in the accelerator we mainly help founders,
yeah,
and see that early companies, even seed stage A, B, C, that you are still a team of 300 people or less. There's a lot of messaging and product marketing that it should be founder led,
mhm,
because externally people see the product as the founder. It'll
yes,
endorse, right? It will. People want to talk to the founders because the founder has a vision, a mentality, a feeling of the pain that no one else in the organization is going to be able to communicate better, right? So,
right.
is this something that you also saw in your time in NASA as a highlight of your career as well?
Yes, yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. It's not just the messages, but the messengers, right? And so to your point, that founder is the messenger. and delivering these messages. And so we discovered that a lot of them weren't as maybe prepared as they could be.
Hmm.
And so we came up with this workshop um, called Credible Messenger Workshop. And I actually partnered with our friends at Caltech, the theater arts department, and we put together a 10-week workshop. It's about 90 minutes a week,
Hmm.
with some homework in between, where we get folks to find their authentic voice. We don't want them to sound like anybody else. They have their unique story to tell, and they need to find it and own it, and then go out and share it. And so um, we lean into some improv skills, we lean into some acting skills, we lean into voice work. Um, and I think one of the neatest comments that we got from one of our scientists was, I also play an instrument, and before I perform, I warm up my instrument, make sure it's all in tune.
Hmm.
And she never realized that she needed to warm up her instrument when she goes to to a talk, right, or speak. And so yeah, I think that's key,
That's true.
Joaquin, that they really need to be ready as a credible messenger. And it's not as hard as you think. It's just a matter of really being yourself and being relatable.
Hmm. It's also understanding about what mistakes, right? A lot of practice
Yeah.
required. That warm up is okay. If I practice this pitch 10 times, the 11th time is definitely going to be better, right?
Yeah, well,
I learn from.
and the neat thing about the workshop is, you do it with a cohort, let's say of maybe 10 to 12 folks. And so to your point, you now have this little community where you can say, "Hey, I'm about to give a talk, and can we hop on a Zoom, and can I run it by you, right? And get some feedback." And so that's been a great output of these workshops as well.
So in the industry, like space, frontier tech industries, I, s- I see that founders have sometimes much more technical expertise from areas of physics or
Mhm.
chemistry or math, like scientists, researchers, like you mentioned. And sometimes those presentation skills uh, need to be improved, because maybe there's a higher gap that someone that is selling SaaS applications because that
Yeah.
person was a seller before. So, what do you think are, based on the user personas that you were helping, like these researchers, these scientists, what do you think were the most common mistakes that you saw when they were doing these pitch decks or very early narratives of the products?
Yeah. Um, yeah, some of these are pretty straightforward, but they're very, very common, right? So too many words,
Mm,
right?
mm,
And because there's so many words, they tend to read the slides, right? Not only the presenter, but then your audience. So they're not focused on you. They're sometimes reading ahead, right? Because you have just too many words on your slide. Um, and then I would say a disconnected narrative flow, right? So you're not kind of taking a nice flow to make your point. You're a little disjointed, and it's you're losing your
mhm.
your audience. And then I think another one is lack of context. So right up front, setting the context, making sure everybody's in the same place before you start your story, right? Kind of get everybody on some common ground. And then the lack of a metaphor or an analogy to help folks. So maybe after the context, right, you start talking about your product and make a metaphor and make an analogy. So again, folks can come with you,
Uh,
follow along with you. It's your responsibility to make sure the audience follows you and follows along. Um, and then of course, the final one is just that common trap of jargon, and
Buzzword.
using yeah, using words that make a lot of sense to you and your team because you're so close to it, but you may lose your audience with that jargon as well.
That's a very good point. I believe so many times we are so much focused on how we say the message and not how people hear the message.
Yes,
different
absolutely.
things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where, you know, uh, we tend to try to get folks to do more of a billboard approach towards their visuals,
Oh,
right? So
yeah,
maybe there's just a couple of keywords, but there's this beautiful emotional image, right? That people are like, wow, and then they're looking at you, right? To wow, okay, so what and then you can then talk, and to your point, make sure they're hearing what you want to say. Yeah, that's a big part of what we go over with our teams, with some of our methodologies is, you know, did they hear what I wanted them to hear, and
yeah.
that can be tough sometimes.
You mentioned something I really like about the emotional aspect,
Yeah,
right? All of these topics are highly complex. Did you what kind of resources or tips, hacks maybe you can give founders that have these very highly complex topics
yeah,
to create that emotional connection with the user, with the listener? Do you have
yeah,
any tips and tricks there?
yeah. So what this it's this concept of emotional investment, right? By the stakeholders as you're telling your story, and it kind of usually falls into two buckets, right? Perception management, and then the application, and like the business application. Because if you can understand maybe those preconceived notions from your stakeholders or your audience, um, of your product. So going in, so an example was yeah, years ago, for the heliophysics mission, um, they wanted to use a loose constellation of small sats, right?
Hmm.
So and it was a difficult story to tell in 2D, right? To tell in a written book. But also we knew there was this preconceived notion out there in the community, because these were still kind of new, that oh, they can't do real science. So we knew we had to overcome that. So there was a perception management challenge
Yeah.
of our solution or our approach, right? And um and then also I'd say the other thing is, you know how it will change us. So, just kind of just bring it home, kind of straightforward, simple words. you know Here's, you're building that emotional investment, you're getting them rooting for you, and then you kind of say, and here's how it's going to change us, right? Or, us is the big word, but, here's how it's going to change the market here or the community here. Mm. Maybe even humanity itself, right? That's kind of what NASA was doing, right? Kind of
Paul,
fill
I've
in a
always
knowledge gap.
admired Steve Jobs as a
Yeah,
communicator. And I think for me, one of the big things that he did is that he always painted the vision of the future and the current state of things in this huge gap that Apple could feel,
yeah.
right? And it was always emotional. Like he was not at least in his presentation that I've seen, he was always very like emotional to show this is the state of the art today. This is how Apple can completely change it, right?
Mhm.
Do you have any other like role models, like communicators that you think people can follow to learn from online?
Yeah. Well, as you mentioned, Steve Jobs is great. And then also, I think maybe not so much as a presenter, but for their knowledge of presenting, is folks like Simon Sinek, right?
Mm,
He's amazing. But then you have folks like Neil Tyson deGrasse, and some of the more space oriented
yeah.
presenters and speakers. But they're out there, and so I think even as for your specific, let's say tech
Yeah.
or disruption, right? There's folks out there speaking, and so it's always good to just Google folks, watch YouTube videos, and
Hmm.
um and kind of observe, the kind of things that they're
Yeah.
doing, the kind of platforms that they're using. There's so many now, to get
Hmm.
to get the word out. So those are a couple. of folks that I think
You
do
know,
a really
I
good
think
job.
it's similar to what I've done with this podcast. I'm not a expert at all, but I just watch a lot of podcasts, saw what they were
Yeah,
using as tools, and
yeah,
I'm just practicing and get better as we go, right?
yeah. Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay, Paul, I want to shift gears now
Yep.
because in your story there's something that is very interesting, and you are a certified Lego serious play facilitator. So
Yes.
what's the real purpose of that method and why does it work even in technical teams?
Yeah. So we kind of stumbled across it. We were at a conference, and there was a young man there, just kind of in between sessions, just had this long table and little piles of Lego. And then, he would just, as people were transitioning, he'd say, "Hey, anybody want to play with Legos for, you'll be in 5 minutes, you'll be in time for your next talk, right? Your next session."
Okay.
And all he simply did was we all gathered around. I said, "Okay, everybody, you've got about the same number of bricks, you've got about the same type of bricks. Everybody build a tower, right?" So, "Oh, okay." So everyone's, doing their thing. I guess I'll give you 1 minute, right? Everyone's doing their thing. And then he calls time, and then he's like, "Okay, great, everybody got a tower," and everyone's going, "Yeah, yeah." We're all kind of looking around the table, and everybody's got very different looking, towers.
Mhm.
And he's like, "Okay, how many people had a tall tower?" A few people raise their hand. "How many people had a symmetrical tower?" A couple people raise their hands. And just, and then he went on, with short, whatever. And then he said, it's interesting how we all think differently,
Huh.
right? And we all have a different idea of what a tower is and what it means to us. And that just grabbed me, and I thought, wow, that happens a lot on our mission teams. And so we went and we had them come down to the lab at JPL, and we took like a 3-day training session. And
Mhm.
then, of course, at JPL, we had to adapt it, right? We
Yeah.
had to make it better, right?
Yeah.
But the main thing, Joaquin, with technical technology teams, science teams, just very tech engineers, right? Is a lot of times they're not so good answering a prompt, kind of face to face,
Okay.
but you ask them to build what they think is their role on the mission team,
Mhm.
and they end up building, a little model here, you
Wow.
know, that then they start talking to it and they say, "Hey, okay, so this is me, and I really support, blah blah blah." And normally we just have a minute or so for folks to share,
Mhm.
but next thing you know, we got to ask these folks to stop because, these once kind of quiet folks were now just sharing and sharing, and it was fantastic.
Wow.
So for
That's it,
us,
Paul,
we've
like
used it
a
quite effectively.
physical anchor,
Yeah,
right? That people
yeah,
can use because maybe they're not sharing because, like you said, eye to eye communication is not something part of their forte, but that
right.
physical anchor helps them unlock something there, right?
Exactly. It kind of to me, I describe it as it kind of breaks that subject matter expert shield and gets to the human again, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they really start sharing, and it's fantastic, and they end up learning a lot about each other. And so
Mm-hmm.
we've seen it really help in optimizing kind of team dynamics.
That's very, very interesting. Paul, one question: can people hire you to facilitate these kind of workshops in other companies, like
Yeah,
founders?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Would be happy to do that. Yep.
Cool. I'm gonna put more information about how they can contact you on the comments of the video,
Great. Thank you. Thank
so
you.
they can definitely do that. I think it's definitely going to be very important in this particular industry where we have technical complexities, more scientists, more researchers.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
gap could be even bigger than any other regular companies, right?
Yes, I agree. I agree.
Perfect. All right. So um, before we go into the quick fire round and we start to wrap up the podcast, the episode, I have one question. Um, but what advice would you give to any founder listening who feel like they don't know how to tell the stories, they don't know how to sell. That, imposter syndrome that
Yeah.
people may feel, where should they start?
So that's a great question. Um, and I think um, they need to just kind of maybe step back and realize that they have a unique story, right? That is uniquely theirs, that only they can tell,
Uh-huh.
right? So find it, right? Create it, own it,
Uh-huh.
and then activate it, right? And so you're the one. So kind of find some peaceful confidence in that this is your story. It's yours alone, and so go out there and tell it. You know. Because nobody else can. Now you can share it with your team, and so like we talked earlier, your team might be able to multiply that story out in the market space, but it's yours, and it's okay to say I may be too close to it. I'm not quite sure how to tell it, and get some help, right? Because a lot of times that's the case. Is you've been in the trenches, you know working on the tech or the capability, and you get a little lost in what started the whole thing. And that's a lot of times what we work with technologists and scientists. It's like, well, take me back to that light bulb moment, right?
Huh.
And this thing popped into your head, and how you said, you know what, this is the what is, and I've got this new idea, and this is the what could be,
Uh-huh.
and just really kind of, like I said, kind of find it, own it, and then just go out there and activate it.
Paul, those type of stories where you have the aha moment that get people excited and motivated is it's a story for everyone. If you're trying to recruit
Yeah.
new people, right?
Yeah.
To motivate investors, to motivate people to buy your product, the audience is really completely varied, because it's a really inspiring emotional story that people really resonate with.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It can work, like you said, across those, work with the culture, bringing culture together. It can work with um, your internal teams, right? And a lot of ways that a good story can have impact and align, inspire, you know, clarity, all that good stuff.
Perfect. Paul, let's go to a couple of quick round questions.
Okay.
And then I'm going to ask you the last question that is, I'm going to tell you more about that in a minute. Okay.
Okay.
Well, so quick fire round. Favorite NASA mission name or tagline?
Okay, the acronym is OMG, and it stands for Oceans Melting Greenland.
Interesting. Okay, I need to do more research. Definitely.
OMG. Yeah, yeah.
OMG. We definitely, um, I'm going to remember that. A book that changed how you think about communication.
Yeah, this one's it's kind of a slow start, but then it really gets super interesting. It's called Story Thinking by Angus Fletcher.
Story thinking. Okay,
Yep.
good advice. And any underrated storytelling tool or framework that you think people can use more?
Yeah, I think we touched on this earlier, but this idea of active listening.
Okay, active listening. Okay, so the last question, Paul, we do this in the podcast, is something that I'm copying from another podcaster that I really love.
Okay.
So the last episode, I have another guest, and I asked that guest without knowing who is the next guest on the podcast, what question would you ask that person? Okay.
Wow.
Well, the previous guest asked you a question, and
Okay.
the question that I want to ask you, and please, I don't want to put you on the spotlight or anything, but he asked, "What work, project, organization you regret the most leaving?" So imagine that you were in a company or in a team or in a project, and you regret the most now in hindsight that you left that. Anything that comes to
Oh,
mind?
that is a great question. And I think where my brain went to was early on in my career. I was working for a large aerospace company, and one of our partners was a small woman-owned business. and I just loved their spirit, right? Kind of the soul of that team. And so about a month after that project ended, they reached out and said, "Hey, would you like to come join us?" And we talked about it, and I went and joined them, and it was lovely. It was, kind of the beginnings of kind of training kiosks, right? We're using different multimedia tools for touch stuff, and so it was kind of fun. We were kind of treading into this unknown territory, and then the owners decided to sell the company,
Okay.
and so we all got little packages and stuff. But yeah, I really missed that. That was just a lot of fun.
That's very interesting. Okay, but now it's your turn. Without knowing who is the next guest,
Yep.
any question that you want to leave for them?
Well, I think I kind of want to, but a little maybe space related in a way that what is, you know if you could, what would be that next moonshot that you would want to take on in your journey, in your career?
Yeah.
What's that? If you had, the planets aligned, what was that? What would be that moonshot?
hmm You know, I've been to the Meta offices a few times here in Menlo Park, and not everywhere, but they have written on the wall this question that is about what would you do if you were not afraid?
Mm,
I think
that's great.
that's where the moonshot that you're talking about, right?
Yeah, I
What
think
if
you're
you
right. Yep,
dig deep if you were not
absolutely.
afraid?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your frameworks,
Yeah.
your deep understanding how stories help bring really bold ideas to life. Your work has really been helpful to launch missions, and today I hope it really helps startup founders and anyone in the community. So, to our listeners, if you're building something in frontier tech and looking for clarity, for connection, for conviction, storytelling is really your secret weapon to tell your message. And mentors like Paul remind us how to tell it well. You can learn more about what we're doing in the International Space Alliance at isa-space.com. And if you enjoyed the episode, share with any other founders that is really figuring out what their story is right now. So until next time, stay curious, stay courageous in pursuit of the next frontier. Thank you so much. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks.
Really
Thank
appreciate it.
you.